Good morning, everyone. Before calling the meeting to order, we have a few housekeeping items to cover. In the event of emergency, there are 2 exits from council chambers. Actually, there's 3 now. One through the doors to the back, or that great big open area. That leads to the main hallway with exits at the front and the back of the building. And one to my right through the door behind the municipal clerk's desk. Our muster point is out front in the plaza. This room is also equipped with 2 panic buttons. Washrooms are out the back door at the end of the hallway and to your left. This meeting will be live streamed and recorded for public viewing. Anyone making a presentation or approaching the council dais or administration table will appear on camera. Lastly, we ask that you please turn your cell phones on silent. I'll look to the clerk, let me know we're on. All right, I call to order this special meeting of council for Tuesday, May 24th. And as we get going here, I would like to recognize that the town of Canmore is located within Treaty 7 region of southern Alberta. In the spirit of respect, reciprocity, and truth, we honor and acknowledge the Canmore area, known as Shooting at Willows in Stoney Nakoda, and the traditional Treaty 7 territory and oral practices of the Stoney Nakoda, comprised of the Bearspaw First Nation, Chiniki First Nation, and Wesley First Nation, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation and the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprised of the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai. We acknowledge that this territory is home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3, within the historical Northwest Métis homeland. We acknowledge all nations who live, work, play, and help us steward this land and who honor and celebrate this territory. We'll now move to approval of the agenda for May 24th. I would like to add one item, and that's a revision to item B1 sub 2. And one second here. You'll be adding in a brief summary, after the brief summary from administration, adding in "and the applicant" after administration in the agenda item. Are there any other changes to the agenda? Seeing none. So I'll move approval of the agenda for May 24th, 2022 special meeting of council as amended. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. All right, so we will move to item B1. This is a public hearing. So I call to order the public hearing for Bylaws 2022-09 and 2022-10. The purpose of these bylaws are to amend the Municipal Development Plan and the Land Use Bylaw with respect to a proposed development for housing and a palliative care facility at 800 3rd Avenue in Canmore. The public hearing will proceed as follows. After I provide this introduction, administration will provide a brief summary of the matter under consideration to set a context for the hearing. Next, the applicant will provide some comments to further contextualize the hearing. Council will have opportunity to ask questions of both the applicant and administration after their respective presentations. Then I will invite members of the public to speak. There will be an opportunity for council to ask questions of clarification after each speaker presents. Once anyone present who wishes to speak has done so, the municipal clerk will provide the names of those who provided written submissions. Then council will again have opportunity to ask questions of the applicant and or administration before the public hearing is closed. I'll say more about the public submissions when we get there, but for now, let's move to the administrative presentation, please. Mr. Fish. Good morning.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. Thank you. I'm used to doing this without 6 different screens, so give me one moment.
And before you get going, I just know that somebody will say they can't hear at the back, and that's because we don't have the best speakers back there. So I'm just going to turn to the clerk and to just make sure everything's turned up as high as it can go. All right, so what you get is what we've got. So we'll try to speak up. Mr. Fish, anytime you're ready.
Great. Thank you, Mayor and Council. I will try and speak loudly, clearly, and I will be brief this morning. As introduced, Bylaw 2022-09 and 10 propose amendments to the MDP and to the Land Use Bylaw. I think everyone is quite familiar with the site. Its location at the south end of 3rd Avenue, directly south of Spring Creek Mountain Village development, north of the wastewater treatment plant, as well as the materials recycling facility, and just southeast of Millennium Park. All access is proposed to be the site from 3rd Avenue, which is the end of the road sort of to the northwest of the site. Administration recognizes that the site is privately owned. Some amount of development is likely. Minimizing the amount of development was a key recommendation of the environmental impact statement and the third-party review, specifically the third-party review, as well as maintaining some of the site as desirable. So the development is proposed in 4 areas: a palliative care facility in Area A, 3 residential homes in Area B, 2 residential homes in Area C, the possibility of accessory dwelling units in both of those areas, as well as Area D, which is the single residential unit in that area, with the majority of that area remaining undeveloped. 3 amendments to the municipal development plan are required and proposed, as well as a new land use bylaw district. Very quickly, we talked about the specifics at first reading, so I won't go through those again. Generally, administration feels that the direct control district as proposed aligns with what is proposed for the site, but administration did have a number of concerns regarding house size, accessory dwelling units, the size of those accessory dwelling units, detached accessory dwelling unit building height in Area D, the lack of trail connections as a result of the environmental reserve easements, and a lack of clarity around proposed climate action initiatives. I won't go into more detail unless council has questions, and I'm happy to answer any of those questions.
Thank you, Mr. Fish. As I was going through this again last night, I just wanted to clarify. I think there was a typo I found, and I just wanted to make sure it was right. And that was in Bylaw 2022-09. I don't know if you have that access. Just in Section 3, it refers to amending MDP 2018-16, and I think it should say MDP 2016-03.
You are correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Great.
Sorry. The 2018 was the last amendment to the municipal development plan.
I thought it was a legacy.
You are correct.
Thing there.
That the reference, the MDP retains its original 2016-03 number.
Okay, good. So that's just a type. That's just a typo. So when it comes back to us for second reading, that will be fixed. Okay, yes. Great. Thank you. Is any other questions of council? Seeing that, thank you very much. I'll now call upon the applicant for a brief presentation. Welcome.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I am Laurie Van Royen. My Blackfoot name is Bidagi, and I am the owner's representative for the landowners Jan and Bernie McCaffrey. I too would like to start by acknowledging that we are on the traditional territory of the Nitsusipi, the Blackfoot Confederacy, which includes Siksika, Bigani, and Gaina, and the home of the Irati Nakota of the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley Nations, and the Dene of Tsuut'ina, as well as Métis Nation Region Number 3. I too am a grateful visitor here and share many thanks to the traditional keepers of the land. Where I live, work, and play, I encourage you to consider your own connection to the territory in which you currently are on, and give thanks to the traditional caretakers of that territory. I'm here today just to
Ms.
provide...
Van Rooyen,
Yes.
if I could just ask you to move that just a little bit closer
Closer?
to you if possible. You'll
There
just
we
be
go.
maximum pickup
Okay.
there. Perfect. Thank you.
Sound all right?
Yes,
Okay,
thank
good.
you.
So I'm here today just to provide a context to the project prior to public hearing. We're looking forward to hearing the submissions today. We've had a chance to review some of the letters that were sent in. We have our team here to answer questions for you. Obviously, Bernie and Jan, who you have met, McCaffrey, who are the landowners, Bonnie Anderson, who is our legal counsel, who has over 20 years' experience in planning and development, Bill Marshall, who most of you know, who's an architect, a registered architect responsible for concept plan in the palliative care facility, Michelle Willette, who is our registered professional planner, Keenan Rudacek, who you met at first reading, who is a professional biologist responsible for the EIS. We also have Richard Simpson here today, who is a registered professional forester, who is also an expert in cumulative effects. And we have members of the Palliative Care Society, including Julie Hamilton and Dr. Eric Wazelenko, who will be speaking as part of the public hearing. So I'm just going to go through, just at a high level, some of the questions and comments and try and address some of those from first reading. The McCaffrey's 21-acre parcel is between the higher density Spring Creek Mountain Village ARP land and the town's wastewater treatment facility immediately south. And thank you, Alaric, for showing us the map. The proposal is to donate part of the land for a palliative care hospice and build a very modest residential development. The low-impact development means that the majority of the McCaffrey's lands, almost 90%, will be left in its natural state. The donation of land to the Palliative Care Society of the Bow Valley will unlock tremendous benefit to the community. The hospice will strengthen the community by providing equitable access at no cost to all Bow Valley residents requiring palliative and hospice care who would otherwise need to leave their community for care in other urban locations. Like many hospice facilities in southern Alberta, it's anticipated that the hospice will have 6 beds and 2 additional beds for respite services. Canmore is an engaged community. I don't think I have to tell you that. The palliative care has raised almost 1/3 of their goal of $20 million, and they are on track to raise the remainder over the next few years. The community is generous, the volunteers are passionate, and there is a deep need for this in the Bow Valley. The proposed concept offers a break from the prior attempts at large-scale development for the lands, ranging anywhere from 39 to 100 residential dwelling units. None of them are as environmentally sensitive as what is currently being proposed. The current application brings clarity and certainty of the land use to this large, undeveloped tract of private land after over 30 years of grandiose development aspirations. The landowners will build their own home and provide 5 additional home sites. These home sites will support the larger infrastructure costs for servicing of the entire property, such as the hospice facility and any costs associated with the planned environmental offsetting. The sensitive and thoughtful selection of the building sites, the amount of development were guided and shaped by the outcomes, findings, and recommendations of the environmental impact statement. The EIS was completed by a professional biologist for the development and reviewed by the Town of Canmore's third-party reviewers. Overall, the concept is an appropriate transition from the higher density of Spring Creek Mountain Village area to the town's wastewater treatment facility and natural areas beyond. The proposed development can be efficiently connected to municipal infrastructure, is less intrusive, and more importantly, is focused on a true balance between environmental stewardship and the built form. The landowners followed the rules set out by the MDP for the EIS. A terms of reference was established jointly by the professional applicants and registered professional biologists and the Town of Canmore's third-party reviewer. The findings of the EIS were agreed to by the town's third-party reviewer, concluded that the proposed concept will have a negligible to low impact on the site. In addition, the EIS has proposed mitigation measures to avoid, reduce, restore, and offset for all potential impacts and effects, and the landowners have agreed to do that. They are also proposing to protect environmentally sensitive habitat, such as the shrubby swamp area, and areas adjacent to the streams through the dedication of environmental reserve easement. And that's a really important aspect to the entire project. All project aspects will adhere to provincial and federal laws and regulations. And both Keenan and Richard are here to answer any questions you might have. As members of council know, the property is located outside the town of Canmore urban growth boundary set in the 2012 Municipal Development Plan and will require your approval to allow this modest development to proceed. Under the MDP, there are very clear criteria for the expansion of the urban growth boundary. A community benefit is achieved, net positive fiscal or socioeconomic impacts are achieved, the proposed development can connect to municipal infrastructure in a fiscally and environmentally responsible manner, and the proposed development does not result in unacceptable environmental impacts. The growth boundary is not expanded when only the lands within the growth boundary are filled. That is a criteria for future planning area that is outlined in section 2.3.6 of the MDP. To be clear, there is no mention within the MDP that the growth boundary can only be moved when other lands are filled within the town boundaries. The application provides long-term exceptional community benefit to the town. The proposed concept meets all 4 of the requirements for an adjustment to the growth boundary in the following way. It provides for a donation of service land for a much-needed palliative care hospice in the Bow Valley, filling a significant gap in the community for end-of-life care. We believe through this public hearing, as you will hear, and the numerous letters of support that were sent in prior to the public hearing, that there is support for this exceptional community benefit in the town of Canmore. The project also achieves a very high score on the town's own sustainability screening report. Plus 240 has been achieved, where most developments fall anywhere between 0.1 and 0.5, or 5.0. The project can connect to the land to and uses existing municipal infrastructure and related lands, including undeveloped, long dedicated 3rd Avenue road allowance south of 1st Street is a responsible way at the owner's cost. It ensures a low to negligible effect on the environment and in fact results in a net positive benefit after offsetting. And it maintains the majority of the land to almost 90% in a natural state. It provides the opportunity for accessory dwelling units based on a 1-to-1 ratio and contributes modestly to the shortage of housing in Canmore. We have heard from some in our community that extending the growth boundary will set a dangerous precedent for developments to come, and this should not be a reason for approving this project. We know that members of council must look at each application individually on its own merits and cannot make decisions on applications based on past decisions or the anticipation of other future potential applications. The land is surrounded by development. The proposed concept will not open the proverbial floodgates to the development in the area because there is areas already developed or policies approved allowing for its development. In fact, the landowners are the last to be developed in the immediate area. The town leapfrogged over the McCaffrey's land to build the wastewater treatment facility. The landowners are merely filling a gap and providing a contextually suitable, modest, low-impact development and amazing community benefit with a hospice facility. The proposal is a package, and we believe it's a win-win. As you also know, the site is currently designated as future development under the current land use bylaw. The purpose of FD is to designate land that is potentially suited for urban uses, including subdivision and development. The landowners have a reasonable expectation to develop their lands with a reasonable regulation by the town. It might be suggested that the town ought not to use FD, a future development district, as a holding district for privately held lands, effectively sterilizing otherwise developable lands for some unknown purpose to be revealed at some unknown point in the future. The fact that there are permitted and discretionary uses right now within the land suggests that development is okay on the property. The question is what type of development: industrial, intensive agriculture, or a use that balances the environmental impact with that of a modest residential development. There are a few lands designated as FD, future district development in the town. Three of them are owned by community housing. There is only one other parcel owned by the province that is shown as FD and a habitat patch. It is a private recreation stables and is in MDP map number 1, but it's within the growth boundary. Insofar as private lands, there are 3 future development districts that are privately owned: Stone Creek, Three Sisters, and McCaffrey lands. Stone Creek is a 1 acre of FD shown as commercial and mixed use on the NDP concept map 1 and is within the growth boundary, but is not within the habitat patch. Three Sisters looks to be about 30 acres. Again, FD shown as private recreation on the MDP concept land use map and is within the growth boundary, but not within the habitat patch. The McCaffrey's land is the only 21-acre parcel zoned FD for future development, yet shown in a habitat patch, is outside the growth boundary, and shown as conservation on the MDP concept land map number 1. Many contradictions that this application hopes to resolve. The proposed concept is about as light as an impact as you can get on the land. FD is meant to address development at a time when that makes logical sense, and we say that that point is now. We do appreciate the opportunity to speak again today to put the application in context, to answer some of the questions that you had at the first reading, and we're looking forward to hearing from the public today on what we believe is a very balanced approach to developing this land. We are happy to answer questions throughout the day of members of council, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Van Rooyen. Just one question before we turn to public submissions, and that is something that is a big question mark, I think, for a lot of people, and that's about house sizes. I wonder if you could speak to house sizes.
Yeah, I'll speak at a very high level. I know that through the public hearing, you'll hear from both Jan and Bernie on the house sizes, but what I can say is that they're very open to having the discussion around the size of the house. I think you heard at first reading, there wasn't an intention to build a 15,000 square foot mansion. That is not characteristic of the McCaffreys, and if there needs to be different language within the DCD, we are happy to look at that.
Great, thank you. Looking to see if there's any other questions from council at this point. There will be an opportunity after public submissions as well. Okay, seeing none.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I do note that there's a few people standing up, and I don't know if there's enough chairs out. Or okay, so there are some back there, if people can. All right, well, we'll do our best. It's that I knew that it would be coming. All right. All right. We'll now move to the public submissions. We'll start with the public verbal submissions. Council would like to hear from everyone who wishes to speak today. In that spirit, we'll be enforcing a 5-minute time limit on presentations. Well, that was interesting. As I was saying, council would like to hear from everyone who wishes to speak today. In that spirit, we'll be enforcing a 5-minute time limit on presentations, not including time for questions from council. We'll be using our countdown timer to help us stay on track. For those on Zoom, you may not be able to see it, and I will provide you with some guidance as you go. If you plan to speak, you should be aware that you will appear on the live web stream of this hearing, and that a recording of this web stream is published online. While you are speaking, we ask that you direct your comments to council. So if you're up at the podium here, you don't need to be talking to the group behind you, you're talking to council. And please limit your comments to the subject of the public hearing. Council will be given an opportunity to ask questions of clarification after each presenter has finished speaking. We ask that speakers and members of the gallery join council in supporting the rights of everyone to be treated with dignity, fairness, and respect. That includes, let's not respond with either cheering or admonishing, as such will impact the feeling of safety of others who may wish to speak either for or against. As chair, I will intervene if necessary to uphold these principles. Now I will open the floor to speakers, first based upon those registered, and then if anyone is present in chambers who wishes to speak, I'll be rotating between those who wish to speak in favor, in opposition, or neutral position. For those joining by Zoom, when I call your name, the meeting host will unmute your microphone and enable your video camera if you're using one. And I would ask Mr. Laidlaw, if you wouldn't mind standing instead of right behind administration, it would be great if you could sort of move over or grab another spot. That'd be appreciated. Thank you. Okay, so how these are organized is we're going to be going between in favor and opposed in an alphabetical order. Great. Thank you, sir. We're going to be starting with Robert Baer, who is here in person. Mr. Baer, welcome.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity of speaking in favor of this hospice proposal. My professional background is as a nephrologist. I was a doctor looking after patients with serious kidney disease, many of whom required dialysis. And the typical annual mortality rate in a dialysis unit is 15 to 20% a year. So in my many years of practice, I witnessed a lot of dying. And I learned a lot of things about dying as a consequence of that witnessing. One of the most important things I learned is that there is a huge gap between how individuals, each of us in the room, want to die and how those wishes are ultimately fulfilled or not. The proposal before you will close that gap. And I think it's important to emphasize the degree to which this proposal is actually in keeping with Alberta health goals. So I'm going to cite some facts based on 2 reports from Alberta Health related to palliative and end-of-life care, each published in 2021. So here are some of the facts. Although a great majority of Albertans have clear ideas about how they want to die, only 15% end up with their wishes being fulfilled. 15%. 60% of Alberta patients with metastatic, that means non-treatable bowel cancer, were never referred to a palliative care service. 60%. 70% of patients like these indicate that they don't want excessive interventions at end of life. And yet many of them end up dying in acute hospital beds or even in intensive care units, receiving unnecessary interventions and subjected to unnecessary suffering. These are all Alberta Health data published in their reports. Alberta Health acknowledges that better end-of-life care is required in Alberta. The problem is that most of the resources are currently placed in Edmonton, Calgary, and to a lesser extent Red Deer, and they're based in acute care and chronic care facilities. Alberta Health, importantly, admits that when hospital capacity is stretched, as it often is, palliative care beds will be used for non-palliative care patients. Of particular importance to the discussion here this afternoon or this morning is that Alberta Health admits that there is a specific need for enhanced palliative and end-of-life care for communities like Canmore, rural communities and small towns, and further admits that in the province, at the present minute, much of what is provided is being provided by non-profit organizations. There are 27 hospice associations extant in the province of Alberta. Sadly, Alberta Health also admits that sometimes it supports these associations and sometimes it doesn't. And it's not a matter of judgment, it's a matter of finances. And finally, Alberta Health has outlined 14 quality indicators through which a community like Canmore and the Bow Valley can decide whether the palliative and end-of-life care services that are being offered meet quality standards. I've reviewed each of these 14 indicators, and I'm unhappy to report that at the present time, very few, if any of them, are being met in the Bow Valley. I'm happy to report that if this hospice center is approved, virtually all of the indicators can be met. I've left a copy of the indicators with administration for your subsequent review, should you be interested. The town of Canmore can change all of the above. It comes down to this: is the town prepared to allow the current state to continue related to inadequate end-of-life care, or will it ensure that it supports a proposal that will change it? I'll just end with my 1 second remaining by saying, in this time of great uncertainty, I can state with certainty one thing: we're all going to die. You are, I am, everyone in the room will. 30,000 Albertans do every year. And it's important that individuals have a right to die receiving caring and compassionate care. It's in keeping with the values of this precious town in which we live, and which I know that you'll want to continue to support and advance. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Baird. I'm just going to look to council to see if there are any questions. Seeing none, thank you very much for being here today. I'll now move to the opposed list. Ms. Anderson, the benefit of having an A name. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor and Council, for this opportunity to speak today. My husband and I have been permanent residents in Canmore for the past 18 years, and I'll begin by stating that palliative care and hospice are important services for any community. We've been a donor for palliative care here in Canmore. I have personally had 4 family members use these type of services. First, my oldest sister, then both of my parents, and now my last remaining sister have all benefited from hospice and palliative care in the places that they reside. As a caregiver to all 4 of them, I share this with you so that you will understand that I understand the importance of these services. I truly do. Having said that, my husband and I must go on record that we are opposed to the 800 3rd Avenue Land Use Bylaw Amendment. First, the land is located in the South Canmore Habitat Patch. The town's own MDP states that no new development shall be allowed within a habitat patch or corridor, section 4.2.11, page 23. The land is also located outside the town's growth boundary, and there will be unacceptable environmental impacts to our wildlife. So according to our town's MDP, section 2.1.5, the growth boundary should not be expanded. The town's own third-party review by MSES states that they do not agree that the cumulative effects will be negligible, and states any further addition of development only contributes to the existing significant cumulative effects. So please reread the MSES 4.0 conclusion. This is a time when we must stand firmly to our principles and values and say no, just not here. We do not want to see any development in our habitat patches or wildlife corridors. These are sacred places, and they simply, in my opinion, must remain untouched. I can hear my old friend Jerry Stevenson saying this would become a death by 1,000 cuts for our wildlife. So again, we wish that you will reject this proposal and keep our South Canmore habitat patch intact. Thank you very much from my husband, Gary, and I.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Any questions from council? Seeing none, thank you. Oh, the collective disappointment. Yeah. I'll now move to the next person on the in favor list, and that's Rosemary Bolton, who is here in person. Ms. Bolton, welcome.
Thank you. Mayor Krauser and esteemed councillors, I thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I've reviewed the letters that people have taken time and energy to write. I'm happy that so many of them support the concept of palliative care. It certainly shows what a compassionate community we have here in Canmore. And I'm respectful for those who are challenged by the proposed location of the hospice at 800 3rd Avenue and the need for the town council to expand the urban growth boundary. It's certainly a complication to the project. We would not be here today if it wasn't for the Town of Canmore's Municipal Development Plan 2016. This document clearly foresaw the need to allow for a variation of such a boundary designation. In section 2.1.5, there are 4 distinct criteria that must be fulfilled before any consideration takes place. These are a positive socioeconomic impact, connection to municipal infrastructure in a fiscally and environmentally responsible manner, the development does not result in unacceptable environmental impacts, and a community benefit is achieved. We meet or exceed these requirements. Very briefly, we will add 25 full-time, high-paying jobs and an estimated $4 million positive income impact to the Canmore community. There will be a very short tie-in to the existing municipal infrastructure. 89% of the land remains in its natural state, as is shown by the science of the environmental impact statement. There is minimal or negligible impact by the environment. And for the record, the EIS has been reviewed by the town's own EARP committee. And finally, having a hospice available for all residents of the Bow Valley, including our residents, our neighbors in Banff, Lake Louise, MD of Bighorn, and the Stoney Nakoda Nations at Morley. In addition to the open access, there will be no cost to using the hospice for the end-of-life services. But let's talk about the hospice and its purposes. We acknowledge that some families choose to die at home. That's wonderful, and I totally respect that. But that doesn't work for everyone. Often there comes a point in the journey of dying that the family and caregivers can no longer cope. The patient needs more medical help, or the caregivers need more support, so they go to the hospital. The care in both Canmore and Banff's hospitals is tremendous, but I know from my own personal experience that an acute care hospital is not conducive to the peaceful, quiet, end-of-life experience that can be provided by a hospice. Once the patient is received at the hospice, they receive round-the-clock care provided by highly trained medical professionals. At this point in the journey, the family are no longer the caregivers. All of the stress of the decision-making, the anxiety and physical exhaustion of caregiving, this burden is removed from them. Parents become parents, sisters, brothers, partners, children. They can be with their loved ones and spend the final days, or in some cases, the final hours, with their loved ones, feeling fully supported in a home-like environment. Being able to say all that needs to be said, or to be able to sit in silence as the situation unfolds. What a gift. And Bill Harder, who you'll meet later on this morning, and his palliative care volunteers will be on hand to provide grief and loss support to both the patient and the family. They will be there during the person's stay at the hospice. And They are there to support the family after the loved one has passed. In this final stage of palliative care and end-of-life journey, we will be there. And this is what the whole thing is really all about. People helping people, communities helping people, compassion and loving kindness. Does the Palliative Care Society provide exceptional community benefit? I believe so, and so do many of those who wrote the letters. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Bolton. Any questions from council? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I'll now call upon Barbara Bellier to be here in person. Oh, was there? Wouldn't be able to make it. Okay. And she provided a written submission, I believe. Okay, okay. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor McCallum. I'll then move to the, this is going to affect the order of speakers, but I'm going to go to the next opposed person. Marjorie Bridge. Ms. Bridge, welcome to council.
Thank you, Sean. A little bit high for me, this. Good morning.
Morning.
My name is Marjorie Sutton Bridge, and I'm here today to represent my neighbours, Mr. and Mrs. Henry Huang, and myself. I believe we're here to discuss a boundary change today. We live at 101 and 105 Harvey Heights Road, the former Forest Ranger Station. I'm here today to make a minor objection to this application because it seems that the habitat patch aspect on this land, which is an elk breeding ground as long as I've been here, is being overlooked. Other than that, I would like to say that my neighbours and I, in particular, are totally in opposition to this project. But we're not totally in opposition to it, but we would like to stress that given the fact that we too are zoned WC, as is this land, Wildland Conservation, if this project is given permission to go ahead, then my neighbours and I expect that we be offered the same privileges and benefit. I've lived in Canmore for 40 years and in my present location for 30 years. In 1991, the town of Canmore acquired a portion of the land from my east boundary to the creek at Harvey Heights.
So, Ms. Bridge, if I could ask that you please focus your comments on the land in question as opposed to your own, you'll certainly, it's certainly within your rights to be applying as well, and every case gets decided on its own merits.
Yes, I'm getting to that.
Okay.
To cut it short then, we have, my previous neighbours and I made an application to change our zoning, which was changed to WC in '99. And we were refused, and we made 2 formal applications to the former councils. We were turned down again once, but the second application we made, we passed with flying colours, with not one voice of dissent in this town. And we got to first, second reading, and 2 public hearings. Not one person objected in this town. On the third reading, for some reason not known to us, 2 councillors were persuaded to change sides, and we lost by 1 vote. Of course, we were terribly disappointed. It's a long process, and it's very expensive to go through. We were disheartened, and we have not applied again. Now,
So
on
relating it
another
back-
note about
Yeah.
the hospice,
Yes, thank you.
regarding the present application, I'm totally in favour of having a hospice in Canmore, but I'm not in favour of using an amenity such as this as a method of achieving one's objective. The very flavour of it doesn't sit well with me. These people are merely giving away 2 acres of land, which is not a real hardship when you have over 20 acres to play with. They're asking for WC lands to be changed to, I don't know quite what they want it to be changed to, but they want to build on it, which is a similar situation that we were in, which is why I bring that subject up. We have tried over about at least 16 years to have got a change of zoning, and we're not successful, and we are not on a habitat patch. So I would finalize by saying that should this project get the green light, given the favors given to people like Dr. Brown and Mr. Biggie's lands, which are all WC, then we would like to say to the town that we too would seek a similar outcome to ourselves should we wish to come forward with another application, and do likewise. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Bridge. And of course, we have to decide this based on the circumstances of this particular application and not having regard for prior or potentially future applications. And it certainly would be open to you to bring an application, and yours would be judged on those the same grounds. So thank you. Any questions from council? Seeing none, thank you, Ms. Bridge.
Thank you.
It's good to see you. I'll call Donna Bradley. Welcome to council.
Thank you. Hope everyone can hear me. I'm Donna Bradley, and my husband is Wayne Fingus. We've been property owners in Canmore for 25 years, and we're full-time residents for 17 years. We support the land use application as proposed, including the expansion of the urban growth boundary. This land is zoned for development, and I realize that's under dispute. We feel the landowners have come up with a well-thought-out, balanced, generous proposal that offers exceptional community benefits, addresses wildlife and environmental impacts, and will provide closure to plans for this land once and for all. We like the low density of housing proposed. Yes, 6 large single-family homes may not solve Canmore's affordability issue, but they won't exacerbate the problem either. They will barely be seen in that location, and each of the homes will have accessory suites, we understand, or at least 5 of the 6 of them will. And that's a 1-to-1 ratio that is impressive, even if they are larger than normally allowed. The low density will offset the high density at Spring Creek, their neighbor, and wouldn't that be a welcome change? And I support the Spring Creek project as well. The proposed plan uses a small percentage of land, and that is refreshing. These landowners are not your typical developers. They are not looking to maximize land use by squeezing every square foot out of their land. They have been cooperative, not antagonistic, completed the required environmental studies, and acknowledged the importance of wildlife movement by leaving much of the land in its natural state. Isn't it better to have a project that provides meaningful community benefit to Canmore and certainty rather than waiting for a developer who may not need the expansion of the boundary but is motivated by profit and maximum land use? So what do I mean by meaningful community benefit? These landowners are willing to donate a service lot in the middle of Canmore to the Palliative Care Society for a hospice that will provide compassionate, end-of-life care, respite care, and family support programs to all members of our community, regardless of socioeconomic status. I say thank you to them. To die in a peaceful, calm, quiet setting surrounded by mountains and vegetation would be heaven before you even get there. Imagine the tremendous indignities and violations of mind and body a person with a terminal illness has already suffered, and the worry and the exhaustion of their loved ones who are trying to hold it together. A hospice would give back some of that dignity and comfort and would be so much more superior to receiving palliative care in a hospital. And the big benefit is this would be close to home. You know, we assume that someone who is dying is surrounded by loved ones, but I'm also thinking about all the single, widowed, divorced, childless people in our town who may not have loved ones to surround them. They could really benefit from a hospice. I'm also thinking about younger mothers and fathers with a terminal illness. They might not want to spend their final days at home because then their children might be traumatized by having to live in that home afterwards. They may not want to die in a hospital either, as their surviving children might then carry a fear of hospital settings. What about all the volunteers in our community who have given so much of their time and talent to important causes? As they age, they might really enjoy a more passive, light-duty volunteer role in the hospice. You know, I'm thinking about our First Nations neighbors who have their own customs and culture surrounding death that cannot easily be accommodated in a hospital setting. I'm happy to see that the Palliative Care Society is already engaging them. So I ask you, please be open to all the positive benefits and possibilities that a hospice in this enviable location can offer. Lastly, I want to acknowledge this extraordinary act of philanthropy on the landowner's part. You know, during our 25 years in the community, I've witnessed a growing cynicism and criticism about the motivation of wealthy residents who have the ability to build large homes. Where is the appreciation that these well-off folks make game-changing contributions that benefit us all? Think of the Arts Place donations that keep that place running, the contribution of land for the Catholic Church, the contribution to get this SPCA built, the donation by the Bellsburg family to improve the Banff Center that we like to sit in. You know, it goes on and on. You know, through my volunteer work over the last 17 years that I've been a full-time resident here, I've come to know a number of the high net worth community members. Most are authentically generous and feel fortunate to be in a position to help others. Many give their time, talent, and their treasure anonymously. They are kind, approachable, not braggarts, and most come from humble beginnings. So please check your bias at the door if you have any against these wealthy residents, and give the McCaffrey family the benefit of the doubt that they are not part of any evil empire. Their heartfelt gift of property for a hospice truly is a remarkable gift, and their plan presents a unique opportunity compared to other possible developments in that area. But it requires you to think outside the box, and in this case, think outside of the boundary. And I know you can. No development will make everyone happy in this community, but this one really truly has an extraordinary benefit, community benefit. Together with low density and minimum % of land used, it outweighs the other concerns and hesitations we feel. Please give it a chance. Let this family be game changers in our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bradley. I'll look to see if there are any questions. Seeing none, thank you very much for participating today. We're now going to go to our first Zoom participant, Kelly Craver. All right, so we'll put that one on hold. Is Brenda Davison here? Great. Good to see you and welcome to council.
Thank you. Well, so I've been here a long time. I think I taught 3 of the people on council. Okay, so listen up. You might want to take notes. All right. So I spoke at the first hearing on this land 30 years ago that it was, that got it zoned as it is now, which is habitat patch. And part of the reason for that is that on the map that was available then, the South Canmore habitat patch, including particularly this part of it, was labeled critical elk wintering habitat. They'd done a study, there was the biology, the science was there. And what that means is that it's great elk habitat, but it's critical in the winter. If there's a long winter and the spring comes late, or the snow is deep, it's a year of deep snow, it's the place that will let that elk herd survive because it's on the valley bottom. It gets green first. It's close to water. They don't have to travel very far. And so when we heard that, a number of us went and spoke at the public hearing, and the council then agreed, and that's how it got set aside in the first place. So that's the first point. I wanted you to understand that that land is valuable, like really valuable. But the second thing is I want to talk to you about your position or in the sweep of history, the environmental history of this valley. You're not the first people dealing with this. It sort of started for me, and I'm sure it was ahead of time for other people, but it came to my attention during the NRCB hearings. I'd never heard about an animal corridor. It seemed like we had a lot of space. The town was only 2,500 people. There was room for us all. But when the NRCB came and we could see the future, what was going to happen on Three Sisters, Silvertip had started, and the people spoke about the need, if we were going to have animals here, the need to do things well. And so the NRCB hearing did two things. First, it required Three Sisters to have an animal corridor, something I'd never heard of, and most of us hadn't, to link K Country to Banff. It's only 10 Ks, but it matters, because all the other ways they can get are higher, and that winter thing matters. You have to have a corridor here. And the second thing they did was they took Wind Valley off the map of development. That's where they wanted their fancy hotel and their big golf course. It was going to be the pristine, the beautiful thing. And the NRCB said, no. It's hard to do that when somebody has the right to do something, but the land was too valuable for grizzly bear habitat. And so they said no. And so that was the beginning of things. Councils have said no to things for a while, but they've also said yes a lot. And we are now 16,000 people. And the space for the animals gets smaller and smaller, and every time somebody comes with a development, it gets smaller again. And the truth is that being an environmentalist in this valley is just a constant battle. Being an elk in this valley is a constant battle, or a bear. But every time a piece of property is put into a habitat patch or a corridor, it isn't safe. Anybody can come along and suggest something, and you have a public hearing. And any council, any new council that doesn't know the history or just has different values, believes in social issues. I mean, look at my hair. I definitely am going to want a palliative care place soon enough. But there's a footprint for the human part, and there's a footprint for the animals, and you can't have both. You have to save some. You just have to say no sometimes. Do the human thing in a human space. And so I feel like this is one of those moments that defines whether or not we are going to make space for both things, particularly when we know that that space is crucial to what's happening. In the end, at that first hearing, I wanted to also invoke some names. At that first hearing, there'll be people that some of you know that spoke, that I sat with that spoke. One was Jim Keevitt. One was Jerry Stevenson. And another one was Nomi Whalen. And they're gone. That history, that part, those voices aren't here anymore. But they spoke passionately and wisely. And at the end of it, I hadn't known Nomi Whalen, who turned out to be the most vivacious, engaging, wonderful woman. And at the end of hers, she invoked the words of Joni Mitchell. And they were, "Don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you've got till it's gone?" Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Davison. No questions of council. I'll now move to Mr. Martin Buckley. Mr. Buckley, welcome to council.
Thank you, Your Worship. Mayor Krausert and councillors, thank you for this opportunity to make a presentation on and in support of Bylaws 2022-09 and 2022-10 for 800 3rd Avenue, the subject lands. My name is Martin Buckley. I'm a longtime resident of Canmore, having moved here in 1983 in the early years of what will become a 37-year career in municipal administration, mostly at the higher management level. I spent 13 years with the town of Canmore and 17 with the MD of Bighorn, and thus I understand the importance and difficulties involved with planning decisions such as the ones facing yourself with these two bylaws. I will make a full disclosure at this point in time. I am a director on the board of the Palliative Care Society of the Bow Valley, but today I'm speaking only as a resident of the town of Canmore who supports good planning in our community. I support the applicant's proposal for the lands described as 800 3rd Avenue, which probably involves subdivision of the lands into a 6 residential lot subdivision with a site for hospice, and the majority of the lands left undeveloped in a more or less open natural state. As has been noted publicly previously by Mayor Krausert in his past time on council, there had been applications for significantly higher density development of these lands which were not appropriate. The current application is clearly a much lower and thus much more acceptable density-wise level of development. I will note that despite the subject lands currently being on the wrong side of the urban growth boundary line, the town has recognized that these lands are intended for development, having zoned the land's future development in the land use bylaw. When speaking of the urban growth boundary, it's also noted that council has allowed for adjustments to this boundary when certain criteria are met according to the municipal development plan. And it's understood an adjustment to the boundary was made in the summer of 2016 during the drafting and passage of the current municipal development plan. I think the wording found on page 384 of your May 3rd meeting agenda package says it best. The growth boundary can be expanded where a community benefit is achieved, a net positive fiscal or socioeconomic impact is achieved. Proposed development can be connected to the municipal infrastructure in a fiscally and environmentally responsible manner, and the proposed development does not result in unacceptable environmental impacts. The proposed concept meets all 4 of the requirements for an adjustment growth boundary, as it provides for a donation of service land to build a much-needed palliative care hospice in the Bow Valley, filling a significant gap in the community for end-of-life care. It achieves a very high positive score on the town's own sustainability screening report. A score of plus 240 has been achieved. It connects to municipal infrastructure in a responsible way at the owner's cost. It shows an extraordinary sensitivity of design for wildlife and an above-average wildlife focus on private land. It ensures low to negligible effects on the environment, and in fact results in a net positive benefit after offsetting. And it protects 89% of the land as open natural space, including an environmental reserve easement for the swampy shrub ecosystem. And again, that's all on your May 3rd agenda package. I'm not going to comment much on the environmental reports and analysis that have been submitted, other than to say it was my interpretation that from attending the May 3rd council meeting, there seems to be a level of acceptance at the professional level, if not full satisfaction, that environmental impacts are minimized, and it appears some members of council believe there would be some environmental improvements if this proposed subdivision and development are allowed, as the development proposed would concentrate human use and reduce habitat disturbance by discouraging, if not eliminating, people traversing the subject lands on the informal trails and elsewhere. Again, I can only indicate that a 6 residential lot subdivision and hospice site has to be far more attractive and acceptable than the higher density proposals that were brought forward in the past, as noted by Mayor Krausert. I also want to comment on the concept expressed by one member of council back on May 3rd, that one of the purposes of the urban growth boundary is to, quote, basically prevent us from sprawling, end quote, and who then also asked, quote, do we actually think we're at a point where we've hit the walls of our community and where we have to step outside that urban growth boundary line, end quote. And I think that's answered by the comments made during your administration presentation on May 3rd, where it was noted that the subject lands are the only privately held land within the habitat patch, are quite unique, and that it was always understood that there would be some development proposals for this land. I suggest to council that it's time to allow the development of the subject lands in the minimally intrusive fashion that's being proposed. I suggest the test for moving the urban growth boundary has been met in a significant way, and there is no reason not to move forward with second and third reading the bylaws. In short, to quote a former football coach, this is the last of the quotes I'm giving you, the future is now. I believe it's not going to get any better than this. And one final point on a note of correction. I note from the reports provided on the community engagement sessions, there's concerns about a road servicing the 2 sub-district C lots on the plan. It needs to be stressed that this is not a road, it is a private shared driveway. pursuant to the existing land use bylaw, section 2.3, vehicle access and driveways. It might well be a condition of subdivision that appropriate signage be installed by a developer indicating the private driveway. There's no exit, Spring Creek, Bow Valley Trail, etc. So I'm just recommending that you have a look at that and change that section, the wording, to shared private driveway, so as not to confuse the public.
Okay. Thank
Mayor, Krause, and councillors, concludes my presentation. Thank you very much.
you, Mr. Buckley. Any questions from council? Seeing none, thank you very much. I'll now move to a Zoom presenter, Lisa Downing. Ms. Downing, welcome to council. Hi. Can you hear
I can
us?
hear.
Very good. All right, well, welcome to council. The microphone is yours.
Okay. Hey, hello, everyone. Mayor and council, thanks for, sorry I can't be there in person. Just trying to save the gas money for getting there, so as you can well understand. Anyways, I just wanted to start out, I know that this, in our community, and I love our community, as you know, that I'm afraid it's going to become a divisive topic, and I don't want that to happen because I think the strength of our community is our community. So I just wanted to kind of go off the top there and to say that I do appreciate what palliative care is trying to do. I really do. My mom was in palliative care. It was a beautiful thing. It was the way I would think Alberta Health Care Services, all of it should be. So just to clear that up, that anybody who's there in palliative care right now, I support what you're doing. You're going to hear that I don't support it in the habitat patch, though, however. I sent in my letter. It's had the nuts and bolts of the urban growth boundary and the MDP, etc. So you guys, if you've had a chance to read that, you know what I mean, what I've said. And I guess at the end of the day, like what we're looking at here is we're looking at, to me anyhow, ultimately we're protecting the habitat patch. That's our first goal, is because the wildlife don't have much left, as Brenda so eloquently said. And, you know, according to, I think it was Hebblewhite's latest report, that we're almost down to 88% of human growth in this valley versus, so that leaves 12% for our wildlife. And that would be like from us walking from down the hallway to the kitchen. That's all they have left. So I think we have to be very, very careful about what we're developing in this, you know, in our habitat patches. The other thing, just in terms of when I was reading through the reports for the habitat, you know, the environmental assessments, etc., it seemed like elk were, it's like, oh, they were just elk. Those are crazy elk in Canmore. There's no other, Canmore is not like any other elk. But I think we have to remember that the elk count too. And it was almost like it were kind of being written off because all that's using that patch is elk. And it's all about biodiversity. I would also note too that within the biologist report that was hired by the proponent, they also identified species at risk. So I think that's to be looked at as well. You can't just, it seems like it was a very kind of myopic study. Maybe that's just my perspective, but it seemed like it was all about the elk. We know that wolves and bears do move through there. They move up that river valley. And as Brenda said, it's critical wildlife habitat for elk in the winter. And they need that. We can't just discount them just because they're elk. It's kind of racist, actually, for wildlife, if you think about it. The other thing, too, is MCES, when they did their study, they identified that there could be cumulative effects, and the Hebblewhite report, I would think, supports that. And as Jerry Stevenson said, death by 1,000 cuts, I think that's what potentially could happen here. And my concerns, my ultimate concerns for that are that we don't do that. The other thing too is the Environmental Advisory Review Board, when you read their report that I think was done in 2021, they actually have concerns about cumulative effects as well. So there are real concerns there about how much we're whittling away at what we have left for wildlife. And then just on some other notes, you know, our council bravely said we have a climate emergency and we need to do we need to take care of our climate. And so I'm not sure exactly what the bylaws are, if there are any, but I think it's something to look at. And I know that the administration have concerns about climate mitigation. Sounds like that's still an unknown. So that's a concern if we're going to live up to our word. Yeah, and just in terms of the hospice, again, I think it's a fantastic idea. I think Canmore needs one, but not in a habitat patch. And I understand that the owners own the land, and they bought that land knowing what had happened in the past and what potentially could come forward. And I applaud them for trying to do the hospice, but that is a carrot that, yeah, it's hard for me to wrap my head around putting a hospice and a palliative care and
Ms. Downing,
in a habitat patch.
you have 15 seconds left. If anything you want to close with.
Sure, but I think the other speakers who were speaking for it got longer. Can't I have another half a minute? Just saying.
Just trying to help you out because you can't see the timer.
Thank you. Yeah, you guys know where I'm coming from. I hope that you make the best decision for wildlife. There'll always be another spot for a hospice in town. And maybe there's a win-win for the owners and the habitat patch. I'm not sure what that would look like, but it doesn't need that size of a footprint in there. Did I wrap it up in 15 seconds?
No, you went 25 seconds over, so congratulations, you got the extra half minute.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Don't see any questions from council, so thank you very much for participating today. I'll now call Mary Lynn Cooper.
Hi, everybody. Excuse my back.
Welcome to council.
Thank you very much. Thank you. You do have a tough job. Sounds like a catch-22, and we're not in Vietnam. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Lynn Cooper, and I'm a retired nurse with 40 years of experience who knows what a gift a hospice could be to our community. Having lived in the valley for nearly 2 decades, I'm very aware of the complex issues around the development in Canmore. My husband and I spent 10 years as volunteers with the Kanenaska Stewards, and we worked on projects that made very positive differences for both wildlife and humans. With the changing demographics of our aging population, and being a senior, of which I'm very proud, I know what a difference a hospice can make to all of us in the future. 1/4 of Canadians at present are over the age of 60, 70, 80, and 90. The 2021 Canmore stats shows we have a much higher population. We hit 40 over 60 and 65. I am very touched by the offer of the owners of the lands of 808 3rd Avenue to include lands for a possible 6-bed hospice center. I do respect the issues raised over the development of this land. I am not here to fight or cause conflict. I am looking to the future for all of us who are blessed to live in this valley. I have participated in attempts to save wildlife corridors. However, I'm not against development that's done wisely and with today's knowledge. However, just like myself, all of us, you are going to die someday. I've always believed that knowledge is power, and I would like to share what palliative care is and what a hospice center offers in regards to care and services to everyone at no cost. I've delivered 75 babies and been with 5 people when they died. I think we need to know our history. Historically, a hospice was a place of rest and care across Europe for pilgrims going to the Holy Land. In the 1800s, the Irish Society of Charity, the Irish Sisters, established hospice for the deaf and dying in England and in Ireland. In 1960, Dame Cecily Saunders, a British physician, established a hospice in London, England, which proposed a new way of caring for the deaf and dying. Her approach combined loving, compassionate care with sophisticated medical intervention that emphasized palliative care, and palliative care speaks to relief of symptoms. And in that rather than curative care. I've worked in hospitals for a year, and the curative care is an approach which gives procedures or treatments focused to reversed illness. Our wonderful little hospital here does a great job, but I cannot walk from delivering a baby 1 minute and go across to a hospice room and a palliative care situation next. I just don't have the skills. In 1967, an American psychiatrist by the name of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross presented research that showed many people dying in large medical centers were suffering severely because it was curative care. She wrote a book on death and dying and gave the public a new and different perspective to look at terminal illness. A hospice center provides a central hub for the care and services for all palliative patients, many who decide to die at home. The center can coordinate home care services, specialists, resources, options, educated volunteers, and the ever-present grief support for everyone that's involved. Thank goodness we're starting to speak to mental health issues. Great services, grief services are a very big part of hospice care. Support for everyone is offered, and this support continues to those left behind. The local Palliative Care Society has a grief support system that is making a very positive difference already in this community. The time and monies involved in creating a hospice in Canmore is very great, and volunteers at every level are working hard to make a possible center. Having the gift of a beautiful piece of land could make such a difference that we could share with the elk. My heartfelt hope is that we can find a way, as a community, such as this beautiful town is, to provide this great opportunity to work together addressing the needs of our citizens. Thank you for listening. Any questions?
Thank you very much for your presentation. I don't see any questions. Thank you. I'll now call on Karsten Hewer.
Not sure how well it will work, but we'll try.
Thanks, Andrew.
Good morning, councillors and Mayor.
Welcome.
Thanks so much for the opportunity to speak today, and thanks for all your work. It's not easy. It's not easy work. I applaud the proposal for the Palliative Care Society for their hospice, but I really do feel a lot of people in support don't fully understand the breadth of the environmental issue, and so I want to just touch on that today. And I'm doing so as a 25-plus year wildlife biologist working in the Valley with a particular interest in wildlife movement. And I was one of the co-authors back in 1998 of the BC Ag Habitat Patch and Corridor Guidelines, which is the time when this habitat patch was established. So I can definitely go into some of the reasons why. So it's a really important area. The habitat patch here is delineated in green, outlined in yellow, and you have the red Canmore 800 proposal signified there. We developed this habitat patch because of its importance for ungulate winter range, and it really did light up on the provincial maps. That was under John Jorgensen from the province, a retired wildlife biologist. But B, it provides a resting point for wildlife that do come in and they're a little bit confused by the maze the town presents them. And then finally, it provides an area in which we can push that wildlife back out into an acceptable area, which is what we're doing with the elk right now as we speak, and with the fences going around a lot of our playgrounds and schoolyards. And we do this a lot in Banff. I've worked for over 30 years as a park warden in Banff National Park. And we need areas when we're hazing wildlife out of town, we need areas for them to go. If we take this out of that equation, all of a sudden we're having to haze them through a development as well. Here we have some data, and again, this is just a sample of some of the grizzly bear activity that we have in the South Canmore Habitat Patch. This is courtesy of a 2006 radio collared grizzly bear study that the data is provided by Alberta Environment. And then we had a wolf last winter coming down from Banff, worked its way through town through the Three Sisters corridor as the public hearing was going on, and then looped around and into the South Canmore Habitat Patch. And granted, they're not going right into the 800 lands, but they're using that habitat patch. And this is really important for my next point. And elk, I've zoomed in here, red outline is the 800 Canmore lands. And again, this is a radio collared elk study done by Alberta Environment and Parks. And it just lights up, especially in that important winter season. And you can go in there and walk and you see all the branched shrubbery in there, and that's indicative of extremely high grazing or browsing pressure. But the important thing and my second point is that wildlife are displaced by more than the footprint of a development. It's what's called zones of influence. And there was a big study done that identified this through the radio collar data of 30 wolves and 30 grizzly bears, and over 20 years. And for grizzly bears, it's 200 to 300 meters that you have that zone of influence or that buffer effect. And for wolves, it's 300 to 400 meters. So the effect of this development is not that the footprint of it, the effect of it is that zone of influence. And so it could easily be a third of that wildlife habitat patch that it's actually influencing. Cumulative effects, a lot of people have talked about the MCES study, but we also have that study from all those, some of our premier wildlife biologists in North America that are saying we cannot keep doing what we're doing and still have wildlife here over the long term. And I would argue we're in the 6th great extinction crisis that this globe has ever known. The last one was when an asteroid hit and the dinosaurs went extinct, and the current one is fully due to human activity, and it happens by 1,000 cuts. You might say, well, we're not going to cause anything to go extinct here, but this is actually how extinction happens, is all these small decisions leading to a larger whole. And then finally, it's wetland habitat. 40% of biodiversity found in wetlands. And this area, if you stand on the edge of the current development at the end of 3rd Avenue, you look in there and you're going to need 2 meters of fill to fill everywhere where they do develop in the roads, and it's going to completely disrupt this wetland habitat and the groundwater system by which Canmore drains into. And all the flood mitigations that we're doing up in Cougar Creek, are we now going to obstruct the whole groundwater dynamics of South Canmore? To what end? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I wonder if you can go back to your zones of influence slide. First of all, the one with the circle. Yeah. What are those points there that you've indicated?
Those are grizzly bear radio collar locations. So this is merely a depiction of that the influence on bears through the 30 grizzly bear. This is just one grizzly bear, but through the average of 30 grizzly bears, they were able to identify over 20 years that generally grizzly bears are avoiding 200, 300 meters from our towns.
Okay, so that's actually the distance around some grizzly bear points of where they've been tracked.
It's a depiction of the concept that, we've heard a lot of arguments today. It's going to be 91% is still going to be natural habitat of the footprint.
Yeah.
It's not the footprint that these animals are actually perceiving. It's the actual zone of influence, the smells, the sounds, the light pollution. And generally speaking, the odd habituated animal is an exception. But if we're trying to maintain this valley for, the common denominator of unhabituated animals passing through and using these habitats, and the wildlife corridor system network that's severely under threat from cumulative effects, then we need to be thinking about those zones of influence.
Okay, thank you. With regards to the next slide, so that doesn't really depict the actual proposal, does it?
No, the actual proposal is the hard red line underneath.
Yeah.
That's the 20-acre footprint.
Well,
But it's
actually
quite spread out, as you
It's actually a
know.
lot less than that, right?
Yes, but it's very spread out.
Okay.
So if you were to draw a 200 to 300 meter buffer for grizzly bears, or a 300 to 400 meter buffer for wolves around all the proposed development, whether it's roadways, whether it's individual houses, you'd have a series of overlapping circles that would probably exceed where that line is now.
All right, I'm just curious because the grizzly bear points are obviously a lot closer to development than that would depict.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we have a variety of human characteristics sitting at the table here, and we see that in wildlife all the time. And perhaps this is a habituated grizzly bear that has a little bit higher tolerance, but is that really what we want to be managing the habitat patch for? Because that leads to problems, as we all know.
All right, great, thank you very much. Looking to see if there's any other questions of council. Seeing none, thank you very
Great.
much for
Thanks for your time.
Thanks very much for participating today.
My pleasure.
Okay, we've got time for one more before we take a break. So I'll call upon Bill Kreiderman. Welcome to council.
Thank you. Good morning, Mayor, councilors. My name is Bill Kreiderman, and I'm here today because I believe it is important for community members to be involved in Canmore's future. Regarding the proposed development concept for the land parcel at 800 3rd Avenue in Canmore, I am in support of this proposal. I appreciate that this proposal was created in collaboration with Town of Canmore Planning Department. Living in Spring Creek, I am concerned about larger, denser development on this adjacent land and many other considerations, including wildlife. That this proposal leaves most, 89% of the land parcel in its natural state is a major plus. The parcel is classified future development district and is very likely, or at least quite possibly, going to be developed someday. I would like to see this proposal accepted by the Town of Canmore on merit. It is responsible, in my opinion, it is responsible, compassionate and generous, and environmentally conscientious. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Kreiderman. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you for participating today.
Thank you.
I'm now going to call a short break. We're going to return at 20 to 11, so about 12 minutes. And if we could all return promptly, there's a lot more to hear. Thank you. to see if we're back online. Great, thank you. All right, we'll continue with this public hearing. And now I'll call upon Dave Lipa. Welcome to council.
Thank you. Good morning, councillors. Good morning, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for this opportunity to speak this morning. Like I said, my name is Dave Lipa. I'm a relatively newer member of the Canmore community, being here full-time for the last couple of years.
Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't normally do these political kind of discussions, and however, this issue has kind of struck a kind of nerve ending with me, and I felt compelled to come and just voice my input today. And you know, there's a lot of philosophical congestion I sense around this issue of the hospice. And you know, first and foremost, I want to say that I think a hospice is a wonderful facility. I've had aging parents, I've had friends who have passed in palliative care, and I really realize the value of these kind of services. And I do believe Canmore is deserving of such care and palliative care in this community. I think Canmore could use that with support of AHS, but I don't believe, in my opinion, that it should be in a habitat area. You know, second, I think the landowners, Jan and Bernie McCaffrey, I hear they're wonderful people. I have not met them. They've had a lot of positive impact on many people over the years. So my comments opposing this development are not in any way to be negatively construed towards them. So let me summarize my reasons why I'm opposed to this development. One, clearly this land is outside our planned growth boundary. It's a sensitive habitat area. As town councillors, you have been elected and you have this responsibility of stewardship of all things this town holds most valuable. You've been elected to manage these towns on the town's benefit, and I think the Bow Valley is recognized that we value our precious land, we value our precious wildlife, and we value our precious environment. I would suggest that these are the main things this town places the highest value on. Someone has to give a voice to the wildlife. Someone has to give a voice to the land. Someone has to give a voice to the environment. This is my expectation of this council, is to be that voice. Really do a gut check on what is right and wrong. I do not see philanthropic gesture here. I see a trade-off. Give me this, I'll give you that. This notion of a donation really bothers me. It's not a donation, in my opinion. It's a tax. Maybe tax lawyers will view it that way and make it qualify as such, but I see it as a trade-off. More mega homes to be built in the Canmore habitat area. Some things do not belong at the bartering table. Things that we hold of such value should not be traded away. This is the development game, and I always say, well, what's next? Maybe a homeless shelter so we have a gondola to go up Lady Mac. You know, a hospice is a wonderful goal for this community. It's a want versus a need, in my opinion. Let's not sell out our habitat land. Let's not trade off this wanted but not needed infrastructure at this current point. I think it lacks AHS support at this time and the proper funding. I always say, if it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, smells like a duck, it's a duck. This proposal, in my opinion, is a development deal, not a philanthropic gesture. I, for one, do not want this proposal to go any further than today, so vote no. And let's hold our heads high as we pursue a hospice that we can all be proud of. Thanks for all your time today.
Thank you very much. Don't see any questions of council, so thank you for participating today. I'll call upon Rick Daniel. Mr. Daniel, welcome to council.
Thank you very much, Mayor Krause and members of council. It's nice to see you all in person. I think it's been over 2 years since I've seen any of you in person. It's a nice change. My name is Rick Daniel, and my wife and I have been residents of Canmore for over 30 years. I've been active in a number of volunteer organizations and a volunteer member of a number of Town of Canmore committees. And it's really as a result of my involvement in one of those committees, the Environmental Advisory Review Committee, that I became aware of this project. I was going to say that I've never met the applicants, but Mr. Caffrey just introduced himself to me during the break, so I can't say that. But my knowledge of the project really comes from my involvement on ERC, because the first draft of the environmental impact statement came before ERC when I was still on that committee. I reviewed it in detail, as well as the review of the third-party reviewer. And I also visited the land a couple of times to get a better sense of its current state and the likely impact of this development. I should point out, by the way, I'm no longer on the ERC committee. My term expired, so I'm speaking as a private citizen here, not representing that committee. When I was a member of the committee, though, and reviewed all the material on this project, I came to three key conclusions. One was that the project would have minimal negative environmental impact and may even help to prevent some negative impacts by providing a low-density buffer between the future high-density development in Spring Creek and the larger part of the habitat patch, that part that's on Crown land that lies south of this property. Stage 4 of Spring Creek will bring 244 new dwelling units, a mix of permanent and part-time residents and visitors, all within 150 meters of this property. And a perimeter trail around the Spring Creek development will run right along the northern edge of this property. Surely, if this property is left undeveloped, there will be a temptation for these new residents and visitors to trespass across the property of the applicant and into the larger area of the habitat patch that lies to the south. Some of this trespass will occur in any event, I'm sure. But it's pretty well established that the development of low-density private property does provide some deterrent and some buffer to that kind of trespass from a high-density area to a sensitive area. So I think this proposal was very well designed in that sense. My second conclusion was that the current location of the municipal growth boundary is difficult to justify and should be amended in this case. That growth boundary is important in terms of preventing spread of the community up the slopes of the valley. But this property is almost in the dead center of this community. I went through an exercise of drawing a line from the far northwest extent of building in Canmore to the southeast and from the northeast to the southwest. Those two lines almost cross right over top of this property, which means it's about as central to the current developed land of Canmore as you can get. And a small adjustment to the municipal growth boundary, in this case, in no way represents sprawl for this community. And my third conclusion is that the South Canmore habitat patch has not been a very effective habitat patch, and as is clear from the environmental impact statement, it does not provide critical habitat, and that is a key phrase. And in particular, this small piece of private property, the only private property within the patch, lying at the far north end of the habitat patch, it's hard to visualize this as ever being critical habitat. I won't dwell on that in any more detail because I think the environmental impact statement covers it quite thoroughly. So with that, I timed it perfectly, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Daniel. Looking to council to see if there's any questions. Seeing none, thank you very much for participating today. I'll now call on Chris Lonez. Did I mispronounce your name?
No, that was really well done.
Oh, thank you. All right, and welcome to council.
Thank you very much. I just have a short PowerPoint presentation that I'll also bring up to support my comments. Lowness.
Lowness. L-O-H-N-E-S.
Yes. There are two Lownesses I've heard in town, but or at least Lowness families, but I haven't found the other one yet. Okay, I'll jump right into it. I'm kind of a numbers person, and so I focused my comments around the sustainability screening report that was prepared by the developers, and we'll kind of use that to support my comments. So I apologize for people that aren't as into the numbers, but this is an area that I jumped into. And just before we get started, so it's the Sustainability Screening Report, or SSR, has been referred to a couple of times by others in their comments. And it's essentially, so it's one of the submitted documents, and it's meant to show kind of a pro-con list or kind of calculation, let's say, of whether or not development is beneficial to the community. So let's have a look. This is the, so up on the screen, I've got the original submission here in the green box. And it shows this net score of positive 300 points. And so the positive score is saying this is a positive for the community, and that's what's been referenced by a couple of the other presentations. But being a numbers person, I kind of wanted to dig into it. And so I looked at the template, and it's publicly available, and I can provide you with kind of the backup information for what I'm about to present. And it seems to me like it should be driven by three key areas. So, and I say should. So seniors housing, environmental impact, and affordable housing. And these are the key areas that I've highlighted here in green. You can see right now the units of seniors housing, that evaluation is 300 points. And so that's giving us, essentially it's offsetting all other impacts and giving us the positive 300 points. I did correspond with Town of Canmore Planning Department. They were super helpful, and they kind of confirmed that due to the nature of this development, that seniors housing component is, let's say, exaggerated slightly. But I think, so I can go into more detail if people have questions on that and just how that calculation works, because I looked into the details. But I think I'd like to go to the other two issues which were omitted from the original submission. So first, environmental impact. As we've talked about previously, these are lands that are kind of labeled for conservation, part of the habitat patch. And again, I was unclear, should this be, for an SSR submission, be considered environmentally sensitive lands? And there the town was very helpful in confirming that, yes, this is environmentally sensitive lands. And therefore, this should be considered in the calculation, and also the fact that all of the land in the area in question is considered as such. So here we have, so this evaluation would kick out negative 400 points for that criteria, which I think, based on some of the comments that we're hearing today, starts to have a more accurate reflection of the pros and cons that we're seeing in this land. And also with the way the development is proposed, with things such as bridges over Spring Creek, Thank you. Eat the mic. I will eat the mic. So, talking about the environmental impact, also the way the development is proposed, with bridges over the creek, with kind of a district control approval for extensive agricultural use, and I understand from the kind of sessions that were held by the developers that this is for having horses on the property, that this is a significant consideration. The next area I'd like to talk about is affordable housing. So this was also left out of the original sustainability screening report. We know from discussions of the type of houses that are being proposed. Here are a couple of screenshots just from recent realtor postings in the Canmore area. This is, of course, not affordable housing. And the way that this score works is essentially the proposed housing is compared against median income in the area. And so we input these values, and I used a fairly conservative number for the lots that are being developed, and we get another negative 24 points. And so this would drive the report further into the negative. And this does not consider the fact that the development proposed, not only is it not affordable housing, but it would, I think, exacerbate the current affordable housing situation in the valley. So I'll jump right to my conclusions. So first of all, with these adjustments, the SSR index is negative, so that means it's a net negative to the community. I think on these merits that the proposal should be rejected. This is showing that the environmental and affordability concerns outweigh the benefits of the seniors housing. And that seniors housing, though, that I think that we can agree is a positive initiative, but perhaps this is not the right area for that. Second key point, extensive resources have been kind of put in place to show this development in a positive light, and the SSR being one example of that in its original version. And so please consider that as you're looking not only at the SSR, but also the other documents that have been submitted by the developer. And last point, rejecting this development, it's not a rejection of the palliative care facility. I think we can acknowledge that this has raised a lot of awareness for the Palliative Care Society for the need in the community, and I think that even speaks to the fundraising that they've done, which I think is a really big positive and something that we can work on. But I think that we should reject this development, which is really a development of exclusive estate homes and proposed agriculture on conservation land outside of the growth boundary, and therefore I urge Council to reject the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lones. For taking a very unique approach, because I'm willing to bet that there won't be many speaking to the SSR today.
Got to play to our strengths, right?
Yeah. Now, I do have. I think you might be using a different version of the SSR than we received in our package, because the one in our package has a net score of 239.
Yeah.
And there is impacts for environmentally sensitive lands. And even if you take out the 209, which you rightly identify is the big plus,
yes,
it results in a positive net score of 30.
And does it have also has the affordability concerns included in the newest version?
Yeah, it has 0 for the affordability of market housing.
So I think
in relation to median income.
So I think first of all, I think that's positive. I had emailed with the town and understood that information would be provided to the developer. And so I think that's good that they have taken that into consideration. I think the affordability should still be considered. And I would also note that so I worked through each of the inputs in quite a bit of detail. And it's a guideline, right? And there's room for managing the inputs, let's say, that would impact the score. But I just think it's important to note that the way it was originally presented was, I think, misleading in the benefits, the net benefits, let's say, of the proposal.
Yeah, thank you. And your point's definitely taken. That's why it is just used for guidance as opposed to a hard determinant.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So thank you very much for the work that you've done and appearing today. Just looking to see if there are any other questions of council. And I see none. Thank you for your participation.
Okay, thank you for your time.
Now I'll call on Norman Drager. Welcome to council.
Great, thank you. Thank you all for your time and your efforts. I'm a recent Lac des Arcs resident, and I was president of the community association there and involved in a number of volunteer efforts within the MD of Bighorn and also in Canmore, which I will be doing again later today. I grew up on a farm, though. It was part of a rural community, which I consider our communities here in the Bow Valley all to be. Everyone knew everyone. Most of the families knew each other's issues and challenges. They helped each other, and even now, when they're in desperate need of help, and a lot of my family's members they're currently sandbagging and building dikes around properties. People show up. They just show up with equipment, with friends. They've got each other's backs, beginning to end. And I've lived across the prairies around Europe and was fortunate enough to be here in the Bow Valley just in time for the flood in 2013, that thriving and surviving towns have certain building blocks. There's schools, churches, elevators, hockey rinks, curling rinks. Hospitals were for the lucky communities. And when those building blocks started disappearing, eventually the town and the communities did as well. No elevator, no curling rink, writing's on the wall. And the reason I mention this is the needs of communities change over decades and generations. We have an aging population, and family and social structures requiring care for those with life-limiting illnesses are changing. Our evolving demographics mean that it's often not possible anymore to put grandma or grandpa or family member or friend into an extra bedroom and care for them 24/7. And even if you can, you get to a point where they need the ability to stop being the caregiver. They've got to spend their time and being the son, the daughter, a friend again. And a caring and compassionate community evolves to manage the changing needs of its residents. Due to the nature of my volunteering in the Bow Valley and elsewhere, I've had the privilege of being with quite a number of people as they've taken their last breaths. And I have family and friends who needed palliative care, including hospice, and just in the last few weeks, in different community, but they weren't able to get it. And I cannot imagine a community having an opportunity for such a facility as is proposed, and yet passing it up, which in my view, due to manageable administrative criteria and hurdles that can be overcome. I think it'd be a huge disservice to the citizens who elected those responsible for ensuring their needs and the needs of the next generations in these communities. A board or council's purpose is to provide oversight, governance, insight, and foresight. All three are necessary, and for full spectrum palliative care, including a hospice and home services for palliative care, it's about having insight and foresight for your community's needs. We should take this chance to be a more complete community. We should stand out as having state-of-the-art services and facilities future-proofed for our aging population. Please leverage the grassroots charitable individuals and organizations, and don't turn away such a glorious opportunity to service those who elected you and whom you represent. Just think how many communities would love to have such a group or this kind of a project. I've networked with a lot of other rural palliative and hospice organizations, so I can confirm that. And look who's driving this project: doctors, nurses, healthcare professionals, business people, supported by a growing army of volunteers and local businesses. When we all look back on our careers in volunteerism efforts, this is an example of one reference you can make when answering the question, what are you most proud of? I haven't heard of significant enough valid reasons to oppose the initiative, but I totally get that it's a trade-off. All these decisions are, anytime you're talking about the use of resources. We should not be satisfied to have residents have on their epitaph that the Bow Valley was a great place to live. They should have that the Bow Valley was a great place to live and die. And if you're wondering why I'm not in the community anymore, it's because I moved closer to my grandkids. 45 minutes, 50 minutes. And if I can't be willing to commute 50 minutes every other day or so to visit my grandkids, how can we expect people in their 70s, 80s, and 90s to drive to Calgary for the last couple of weeks of their spouse's life or their kid's life? Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Drager. I don't see any questions. Thank you for your participation today. We're now going to Zoom for Alan McFadden. Okay, just connecting here. Mr. McFadden, I think you're still muted. There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Absolutely. Welcome to
Good,
council.
I'm glad. I'm not the most technically competent person in the world, I must say. I'd like to congratulate the council for allowing us to speak at an issue as important as this. I'm a member of the steering committee of BOCORD, and I'm making this presentation on behalf of BOCORD. It's with some reluctance, I think, that BOCORD opposes this particular proposal in these bylaws. We would have no hesitancy whatsoever in opposing these bylaws if they involve putting $6 million estate homes into a habitat patch. Obviously, the more difficult point relates to the hospice. A hospice is a much needed facility in Canmore. It's a very desirable facility. And yet, in looking at the presentation here and the location, BOCORD has reached the conclusion that this is just the wrong site for a facility such as a hospice. It should not be built within the area of a habitat patch. Canmore and Canmore citizens worked very hard to develop the MDP and the land use bylaw that we now have. I should add that BOCORD was very grateful to the planning department for changing the zoning of much of the South Canmore habitat patch from urban reserve to conservation of wildlife. That, however, still left this one area of private development, which was rezoned from urban reserve to future development. BOCORD does not think that the building of a desirable facility such as a hospice should involve the abandonment of the policies that were hard won to protect the Canmore environment and to provide adequate space for wildlife within the town. Such a trade-off, in the viewpoint of BOCORD, is simply unacceptable. The conservation values in this case should prevail. I would note that the developer in the proposal has indicated that the proposal is largely consistent with the existing policies of the town of Canmore. We've looked at the proposal in some detail and reached a somewhat different conclusion. It seems to us that the proposals, the bylaws that are proposed, are in conflict with at least 6 provisions of the MDP and at least 2 of the LUB. It either requires amendment of these policies or flies directly in the face of the intent of the policies. We are presenting a larger presentation in a written form that I'll email to you shortly after I make this verbal presentation. I'd just like to touch on a few of those points right now. First, there's a provision in the current municipal development plan which states quite clearly that development will not be allowed within a habitat patch. These homes and the proposed possible hospice clearly violate that policy of the land use bylaw. Secondly, there's a provision in the land use bylaw with respect to adjacency to habitat patches and wildlife corridors, which states that development there should follow the guidelines of BCA, which involve layered development from less intensive development to more intensive development. Now, while this proposal is not adjacent to a habitat patch, but it's actually located within a habitat patch, it seems to BOCORD that it flies in the face of the intent of this provision. The part of the proposal that involves most intensive use involves use all the time, staff as well as visitors, significant traffic flow, I expect, and possible movement of cars and people at all times of day and night, is located furthest into the habitat patch. That seems to me to be clearly inconsistent, with the MDP's adoption of BC Ag guidelines for layered development. Thirdly, the MDP includes clear policies with respect to EISs and independent reviews. It requires an independent third-party review of any EIS proposal. And much as we respect MSCS and the work they've done, the proposal, the third-party review that was undertaken by MSCS was not an independent review, it was a collaborative review. We think that that is in violation of what the MDP requires, and that the town, before proceeding with any development on this property, should ensure that there has been a fully independent environmental review of the developer's proposal, preferably done by someone who has an expert in the movement and behavior of elk.
Mr. McFadden, so that's the end of your time. You can't see the clock when it's going. If you have a closing, a very brief closing comment, you can please make that now.
Okay, I'll just make two very quick closing comments. First, we fully endorse the excellent proposal by Carsten Hoyer regarding the significance of this habitat patch. That's what underlies our opposition to the proposal. And I would just re-emphasize that while we oppose the proposal, and we hope that Town Council will do so as well, I would reiterate that if Council is considering adopting this proposal, I would recommend that you do undertake a fully independent third-party review before making your decision.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. And I don't see any questions of Council, so thank you for your participation today.
You're welcome.
I'll now call on Bob Ellard. Mr. Ellard, welcome to Council.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, members of Council. My name is Bob Ellard. I'm a semi-retired architect who's lived in Canmore since 2002 and full-time since 2008. Amongst other things, I'm a volunteer chair of the building committee for the Palliative Care Society of the Bow Valley Hospice. Primary role of our building committee is to oversee all activities related to design, construction, and occupancy of the proposed hospice. When asked to take on this volunteer role about 3 years ago, I had to first ask myself, did I believe in what was going on with the Palliative Care Society? And I said, absolutely. I'm in favor of the hospice in the Bow Valley and Canmore specifically because it will offer extensive community benefits through facility and services that are not currently available in the Bow Valley. A physical hospice in the Bow Valley will offer end-of-life services to the residents of our growing community. As many of you have, I have dealt with the needs of a parent as they approach their final days. These needs are significant, they're very personal, and must be addressed in the most compassionate manner. Our hospice will offer these end-of-life services to the Bow Valley residents at no cost. I want to be clear on that, because there seems to be some confusion. So there's no need for your loved one or you to leave the Bow Valley. I'm going to skip over a few things that have been spoken on before. With respect to our hospice, our committee investigated many potential sites. I think it was 32 in total, all within the Bow Valley, including lands owned by the town of Canmore and the province of Alberta. And this site was the best site for a number of reasons. The overall project on this site is extremely low density, offering an almost rural setting within the town. The larger site also offers our society 2 acres, which we need for our hospice and its associated outdoor spaces. Most other sites within the town were far too small. We actually looked at buying some larger homes and converting them. This just didn't work. But while these and other benefits are important, the fact that we were offered 2 acres of service land at no cost tipped the balance for our decision. This is an extremely generous offer, not just to our society, but to the entire community. The landowners, Jan and Bernie McCaffrey, are the type of people who care about the community they live in and contribute to the continual growth of that community. They've been in this process for over 2 years and constantly confronted with reasons why the town should not approve this project. One example is the frustration is the fact that previous town council would not deal with this. The administration was ready to bring it to a vote. They wouldn't bring it. So we've waited a long time. We now have all the information, and the new council will make that decision. As I stated, I'm in favor of the hospice, so I'd like to speak a little bit about certain community groups that purport to engage our community. In my opinion, this is a misrepresentation of what they actually do. Some of these groups hide behind the term community engagement, using the facts and comments as they choose to oppose many new and beneficial initiatives in the community. They do not want change. One such group states that they're in favor of the hospice. We heard it earlier, just not in this location, not in their backyard. But this is our backyard, our beautiful backyard, so we all get to make that decision. This is, in fact, not engagement, this is opposition, and should be understood for what it is. If these groups were truly engaged, they would work with those involved to resolve the real issues of the project and make good things happen within our community. This project has had extensive input, review, and appropriate revisions, and now it's time to make a decision that is based on the facts. These facts is very low density. 1/2 of 1% of the land is actually being used. 89% of the total land area will remain in its natural state. This proposal provides clarity of land use to a large area of land that until now has been zoned future use. Nobody knew what to call it because everything that had been brought forward was far too dense. This project incorporates all the recommendations identified in the environmental impact study. It preserves the most sensitive portions of the land as an environmental easement, but most importantly, this project, the hospice in particular, is good for our community. I will stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Allard. Councillor Graham, do you have a question? Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you very much for your presentation today. I wonder if you could help me with two things. During the architectural stage, what considerations were given to staff accommodation, employee housing? Any?
None.
Thank you. And can you tell, the report that has 32 sites that were looked at.
Yes.
Has that been shared with council? Not that I'm aware of. Right?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Not certain it's relevant, but...
Can you talk about the other sites, the top 2 sites after this one?
Well, I'll tell you, we started with the hospital. We said there's lots of vacant land there. We could build our hospice right beside the hospital. They wouldn't have it. The province of Alberta, Alberta Health specifically, would have nothing to do with it. So what were we to do? I mean, it's a very logical tie-in. They didn't want to talk to us about it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions?
I don't see any, so thank you very much for your participation today. We're going back up to Zoom with Lindsay Marchessault.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Mayor Crossart and members of council for having me here today to speak on this issue. Other members of the community have already spoken so eloquently and knowledgeably, so I hope to echo and amplify their contributions. So like I think everybody who's spoken so far today, I also and do believe that palliative care, in the full sense of what Lynn described earlier, is needed in the Bow Valley. But, you know, it is a sad fact of life that every single one of us is going to die someday. And I hope that for each of us, it can be a dignified process with access to palliative care. But knowing that life is transient, I care more about what we leave behind. And so we need to develop sustainably and coexistence with wildlife. And the proposal at hand today does not only offer the community palliative care, but that care is incidental to a larger residential development. So, you know, perhaps the owner would be willing to keep the palliative care and build fewer residences and stay within the urban growth boundary. You know, I'm very hopeful that some compromise can be found, and that would be my sincere request to the owner of the property. But otherwise, I ask council to reject this proposal and to develop palliative care elsewhere in Canmore within the urban growth boundary. You know, I heard Mr. Ellard's frustration that it has been challenging to find a site. but I believe that with a will, there is a way, and I think hopefully council and members of the community could get together and maybe work with the province to try to change hearts and minds to get a more appropriate space devoted to the palliative care center. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I don't see any questions of council, so thank you for your participation today. I'll now call on Julie Hamilton. Welcome to council.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, councillors. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak in favor of these two amendments. I am the chair of the board of the Palliative Care Society. I just want to make that very clear. And it's been my honor and privilege to be a member of this charitable group for the last 6 years. My volunteer work has introduced me to many community leaders, philanthropists, and people who want to make the world a better place, particularly a better place for patients and families faced with terminal illness. Jan and Bernie McCaffrey are two such individuals who I had the pleasure of meeting in June of 2018. They wanted to help by donating 2 acres of their 23-acre property for a hospice. Since that time, other individuals from our community have come forward and have indicated their willingness to make major gifts in the millions to ensure the hospice is built. These gifts are transformational. We're a nonprofit society. When you get gifts of that extent, this is transformational. And this has led to our focus on building a state-of-the-art hospice, offering the full spectrum of palliative care services that would serve all residents of the Bow Valley and provide an exceptional community benefit. And I'd like to add that this hospice would be a first in rural Alberta. In testing the feasibility of a hospice, we spoke to many medical professionals and community leaders in the Calgary zone, of which Canmore is a member. There was agreement that a hospice in Canmore would address the current gaps in palliative care, particularly in the area of grief support. Sorry, I've lost my spot. Grief support, respite care, and residential hospice care. The main pushback we faced had to do with the location of the proposed site, which we've heard at length today, as well as accessibility and sustainability of a hospice in the area. I'm going to speak to the accessibility and sustainability. I'm not going to speak about the proposed site per se, because a lot of people have talked about it, but I'm also going to address a little bit of what Mr. Ellard was talking about and other sites that we looked at. The hospice will be a fully accredited public facility, open and accessible to all residents, requiring end-of-life care at no cost. To me, this is clearly an exceptional community benefit. We've heard others talk about the other benefits, and I know in your package I circulated our executive summary of our operational plan. Clearly outlines many other benefits that have already been mentioned by many others here. I also want to talk to you a little bit about the other sites that we looked at. In 2017, we made inquiries to the Canmore Hospital to build a hospice on their site, and as Mr. Ellard said, we were turned down. And this was because the Canmore Hospital has no authority to make decisions in this realm. All capital building decisions, as we learned, require input and decision from Alberta Infrastructure and Alberta Health. In addition, we looked at many other properties, including the old hospital grounds on Hospital Hill. The Oblate brothers, who own this land, were not interested in selling to us or to anyone. We looked at private homes with the intention of retrofitting, and we also looked at municipal properties and lands. I had many meetings with your former mayor about possible purchasing of municipal properties. Private homes were too costly to retrofit, and there were concerns about how the neighbors would take to having a hospice next door. Some municipal properties required multiple levels of government approvals, and some lands were held for affordable housing. We were advised that we could build a 2-story hospice on smaller property, but again, the properties we looked at weren't suitable for a variety of reasons. The main ones being limited parking and access. There was a very large home that we had engineers assess for retrofitting. It was very promising, but the cost of buying the home plus the retrofitting was out of our budget, and it would actually fall short of the services that we had wanted to provide. I want to briefly talk about the sustainability of the hospice. I know this isn't really part of the submission, but this has been brought up on many occasions because of its community benefit. We are on track to raise $20 million over the next 5 years. Capital costs are estimated to be $10 million, including the transfer of title, construction, furniture, and medical equipment. Operational costs are estimated to be $10 million to cover current operations for the next 3 years. And that's a really key important piece to this, is that we're going to operate this fund thing without the next 3 years. I know I'm run out of time, but the important thing I wanted to say is that if we had a site to build this hospice, it would be, and we've also talked about we don't have a contract with AHS, and that's somebody else is going to be talking about that earlier or later, that we don't have a site, but if we had a site, our dialogue with Alberta Health Services would be in a far better shape to obtain the necessary funding.
Thank you, Ms. Hamilton. Looking to see if there's any questions. Seeing none, thank you very much for your participation today. Now call on Bill Harder. Welcome to Council.
Thank you, Mayor and councillors. For transparency, I am an employee of the Palliative Care Society. I do the programming, grief support, sitting with dying people, and all that kind of stuff. I would like to speak on 3 things. The first, a response to a piece of the public dialogue about the word private. And it can be challenging for us to define words when we're communicating. There can be multiple levels. Something is a private enterprise if it's not owned by the public, i.e. a government, municipal, or otherwise. I'll eat the mic. Yeah. So we have that division of public enterprise and private enterprise. Private enterprise might be divided into 2 sections. That which provides funding for a personal or familial or corporate enterprise. So for profit. And the intention of for profit is to make profit for that individual or group. The other part of private is not-for-profit endeavors, which exists for the public good or the common good. And there are many examples in the Valley of private, not-for-profit groups. So there was a concern raised in the public dialogue in the last little while that we are trying to introduce private health care into the Valley. And that just requires that clarification of terms. So most hospice palliative care organizations in Canada are private in the sense they're not owned by the public, i.e. government. They are entirely not-for-profit groups. And so we have, in this case, a representation of our organization, which is not a government-owned organization. It is also not-for-profit. We exist solely for the common good. And in that, we serve vulnerable people, as you've been hearing this morning, and I don't think there's much argument around what we do. But I did want to clarify that as a not-for-profit, it's not our intent to set up private health care as a profit organization, and that what we provide will have a cost, but that cost will not be borne by the users that come to that facility. There's always a cost. The cost will be borne by the donors of our community. Secondly, I just want to highlight, relevant to being in this particular location, that the land in question, which is, there's a cost for us to be in the Valley. And part of that cost is, where do we fit all the pieces we need? And I'm really grateful for the voices I hear this morning that highlight our relationship to the land and how critical that is as a human being here. That the land is nourished and that we have permission from the land to be in this place and to do these things. And then we say, what is the cost for us to be here? This is a fantastic location. And there's a cost to that fantastic location. It's fantastic because it's quiet. Because it lets somebody like me, maybe I get that diagnosis, it lets me go to a place for 6 weeks or 8 weeks where I'm reminded that I'm a creature of the earth, because I'm not surrounded by concrete or power poles, but I see very close to me this very earth that holds me. And there's a cost for that. I really acknowledge the voices we're hearing is